It was 1996. It was 3 years into the Oslo Accords. We Israelis were promised peace. We were promised that this will bring a halt to the terrorism, that the PLO will not carry out any more terror attacks, that Yasser Arafat will become Baal Tshuva. But instead, we got bloodshed. Suicide bombing, drive-by shooting, ambushes, people getting killed on a daily basis, and there was no end in sight. The counterterrorism advisor for the prime minister at the time was Meir Dagan. Meir Dagan was watching this wave of terrorism and was looking for ways to stop them, but with non-conventional ways. Something that will not cost with IDF soldiers' life. Meir Dagan hated wars. And he could not bear the fact that Israel will pay with our own soldiers' life when the other side does not care about its own. So he was looking for ways that will be creative, innovative to fight this terrorism without spilling blood. And he saw something that others did not see. He saw terrorists coming at the border in Ben Gurion with suitcases full of cash. He saw tens of millions of dollars making their way in wire transfers from United States, from Europe, from Syria, Iran, Saudi Arabia, into the West Bank, into the hands of the terror organizations. He saw terrorists teaming up, getting supported by millions of dollars, and he understood that if he wants to stop this flow of terrorism, he must stop the flow of their money. So he went to back then Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and asked him to form a task force that its only goal will be to fight terror funding. It will include representatives of the Mossad, the Israeli CIA, the Shabak, the Israeli FBI, the Treasury, the Israeli IRS, the Defense Ministry, the military, and they have only one mission: target terror financing. Netanyahu agreed, and they established Harpoon. Harpoon was the secret unit in the Mossad that target terror financing. It was secret until we wrote a book about it. That had one mission: follow the money, target the money, kill the money. Money was the oxygen to terrorism, and they were determined to choke it off. In 2002, Meir Dagan was elevated to become the head of the Mossad by his best friend and former mentor and commander, Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. Ariel Sharon was the prime minister at the time of the peak of the Intifada. 2002 was the discotheque in Tel Aviv, the Dolphinarium discotheque, when 28 teenagers getting killed. The Moment Cafe in Jerusalem, 18 young people getting killed. Park Hotel in Netanya, 30 pairs of Seder getting massacred. And Ariel Sharon was desperately looking for ways to stop this terrorism. So he reached out to Meir Dagan. Now, the one who was in charge in Israel for internal affairs, the one that fought domestic terrorism, is the Shabak, is the Israeli Security General Services. Yet, Meir Dagan, Ariel Sharon, approached Meir Dagan because he knew that if he needs to find innovative and creative ways, it will be Meir Dagan that will come up with. He knew how imaginary Meir Dagan could be in the field of counterterrorism. He knew Meir Dagan's story. Meir Dagan was born in 1945 in a train when his parents escaped from Russia to Ukraine, and they were living in there for a couple of years, made Aliyah to Israel. Meir Dagan was 5 years old when he became to Israel, and he immediately wanted to become a Sabra. He wanted to be an Israeli, but he wasn't able to. He didn't know Hebrew. The little he knew, he spoke with a very heavy accent. The family was poor, was living in outskirts neighborhood of Tel Aviv, near Bat Yam. But Meir Dagan wanted to succeed. So when he became 18 and was drafted to the military, he wanted to go to the best units. Back then was Sayeret Matkal. Sayeret Matkal was the one who raided Entebbe, where Yoni Netanyahu got killed. Benjamin Netanyahu, Ehud Barak, all served as their commanders. But again, he wasn't able to. At the time, the kids that were drafted to Sayeret Matkal were the ones who were born to the families of the establishment, of the kibbutzim. Meir Dagan was not born to the right family, with the right connections or the right accent. So he was drafted to the paratroops. And yet, he wanted to be a winner. He was sent to Gaza. The commander of Gaza was Ariel Sharon. And he gave him his first task to eliminate all the terrorists there. When Meir Dagan came to Gaza, there were 850 wanted terrorists. When he left, there were only 9 remain. And he did it in the most creative way. One day, for example, he dressed up as a Palestinian, took his colleagues dressed up as Palestinians as well, came with a boat to the shore of Gaza, and demanded to meet with the local commander of the terror cell in Gaza. When the local commander came to him, he told him that he is the commander of the same cell in South Lebanon. He made all his way, came to Gaza, because the rumor was spread that the local commander collaborates with Israel. He came all the way to put him on trial, and he finds him guilty, he will execute him. The local commander was shivering, was so afraid. He gave Meir Dagan the names of all his co-commanders and his terrorists and his soldiers, and begged Meir Dagan to go and visit each and every one of them and ask them if he ever collaborated with Israel, if he ever was an ally of Israel. He gave him all their names, their phone numbers, their addresses, where are in day, where are in night. In the end of the week, they all were arrested or killed. So Ariel Sharon came to Meir Dagan and asked him, how can they stop these killings? And Meir Dagan told him that his theory, that in order to thwart the terrorism, they have to stop the flow of their money. They have to separate Yasser Arafat and the terror organizations from their money. Ariel Sharon asked him how exactly we can do it. And Meir Dagan said there are 2 ways to accomplish a mission. One above the table, the other one underneath the table. The one above the table is the right and the proper one. The one underneath the table is the one that will get the work done. He told him, let's use Harpoon. So they sent Harpoon unit soldiers to a country in South America, and over there they opened an investment fund. They rented fancy offices in the most lucrative, most exclusive parts of the town. They rented fancy furnitures. They hired beautiful and young secretaries and opened an investment fund. And then they called Mohammed Rashid, who was a financial advisor of Yasser Arafat, to come and to learn about this new investment fund. Mohammed Rashid came and he was shown what type of interest he can get. Very high interest, very lucrative returns, kickbacks, personal benefits that he himself will get if he invests with the company. Mohammed Rashid, who usually were very cautious, left all caution behind and started investing with the company. And indeed, within a couple of months, he got a high return, high interest as high as 30%. Imagine Vanguard matches this. got lucrative returns, personal benefits. So he didn't pull the money out, but invested more and more of Yasser Arafat's money in the company. And then one day, Mohammed Rashid made a random call to the company, and nobody answered the phone. He called the next day, nobody answered the phone. He took a plane. He flew all the way to the Latin America country, looking for the offices. The offices were gone, along with hundreds of millions of dollars of Yasser Arafat's money. What else should we do? Ariel Sharon asked Meir Dagan, and Meir Dagan told him, give me permission. I want to separate the terror organizations from their money, those who are holding bank accounts in the West Bank. So in the beginning, he went to the managers of all these banks that had bank accounts for Hamas, for Islamic Jihad, and urged them to shut down the accounts for the terror organization. The bank manager refused. They said, we are Jordanian bank, Arab banks, what Israel can do to us. So Meir Dagan got a permission, took units of soldiers, hundreds of them, with tanks, and one day came and surrounded all the banks that had bank accounts for Hamas and Islamic Jihad in the West Bank. And then the unit commander came and went to each and every bank, holding a machine gun, demanding to see the bank manager. The bank manager will come, and the unit commander will show the bank manager a military order where he's requested or demand to give the unit commander all the money in cash that, according to Harpoon's records, belonged to Hamas and Islamic Jihad. He asked the bank manager to lead him to the room where the safe of the bank is. And the bank manager, being put out with a machine gun, did not have a choice, went to the safe and gave all the money to the unit commander in cash. And the unit commander gave the bank manager a receipt. The United States was furious at Israel for taking this step. Former President George Bush told Prime Minister Ariel Sharon that no democratic state goes and robs banks. In 2006, during the Second Lebanese War, Israel ran out of targets. They tried to kill Hezbollah from the air. They went after their headquarters, after the military bases, after the missiles launchers, but very quickly they ran out of targets and they were about to do a ground invasion. This means risking soldiers' life. So Meir Dagan came to back then Prime Minister Ehud Olmert and told him if he wants to stop this war, if he wants to bring Hezbollah on their knees, he has to blow up their money. He told him that Hezbollah does not trust the bank in South Lebanon, and they keep their money in the safes, in cash, in the banks. He asked permission to send the Air Force to blow up the banks from the air. Prime Minister Olmert agreed, but the IDF said it's crazy. Who blow up banks during a war? But Olmert insisted. They sent the Air Force. They dropped bombs on the banks. More than $1 billion got eliminated. That belonged to Hezbollah. And in order to make it personal, Meir Dagan went and bombed the houses of the bank managers, saying, if you are a part of a terror organization, if you are the money man of the terror organization, you become a target, perhaps the highest valued target of them all. He made it very clear that from now on, there are no white-collar jobs in a terror organization. We had a front row seat watching the operations of Harpoon and taking part in some of them. Shurat HaDin was established in 2002, in the beginning of the Intifada, when the blood was spilled on the streets of Jerusalem, of Tel Aviv. The country was demoralized. There was darkness and fear hanging in the air. Every single day, a suicide bomber was blowing himself up, and tens of people are getting killed on a monthly basis. And although there were signs, billboards, huge ones, that Zionism will win, the feeling was that Zionism will not win. that the Palestinians believe that they finally found the key that will destroy the Jewish state and will throw us from our land. We know instinctively that this is not a war of military forces and might, but a battle of determination. So we felt that we have to set up by example to show how the country can fight back, that we should not be victims, that the Palestinians can kill us in the terror attacks, but they cannot break our spirit. We launched Shurat HaDin, Israel Law Center, a small group of lawyers barely out of law school, and showed the country how we can fight back. We filed lawsuits against terror organizations and their financial patrons. And Hamas, Islamic Jihad, PLO, Hezbollah, Iran, Syria, Palestinian Authority, in Israel and the United States. And then we were approached by Mayor Dagan and his unit to see if we can collaborate with them. They asked us if they give us evidence that they accumulated in their different operations against the banks, can we use this evidence and bring lawsuits against these banks in the United States? We agreed and started filing lawsuits against Arab banks, European banks, Chinese banks, Lebanese banks. Some of the cases have settled out of court. Some of them are still litigated in the courts in the United States. These cases had a tremendous effect in twofold. One, they pay compensations to the terror victims. Ella Abukasis was only 17 years old when she was walking one day with her brother, 15 years old, coming back from Bnei Akiva youth movement in Sderot, when the red alert went off. This is the alarm that goes on when the missiles are falling from Gaza. In Tel Aviv, you have 90 seconds to find a shelter. In Ashdod, you have 60 seconds to find a shelter. In Sderot, you have 15 seconds to find a shelter. She was walking down the street. It was a bare street. There was no building, no basket to hide underneath them. So the only thing that went into her mind is to protect her brother. She fell over her brother. She covered him. The missile fell right near their heads. Many sharp nails went into their both heads. She fought for 7 days on her life in the hospital. She died. Her brother is disabled for life. We were asked if we can file a lawsuit against a major bank that provided financial services to Hamas at the time. We agreed. We filed the lawsuit in the federal court in New York, and we recently won. I recently met the father of Ella Abukasis, and he told me, "Thank you for letting me fight back. Thank you for getting me my integrity back. I feel I'm no longer a victim." And this is what these cases do. No money can bring back life, but money gives the measure of justice, a measure of closure to the terror victims. The other fault of these cases is that not only this specific bank shut down the bank account for Hamas, but this lawsuit sent a shockwave through the international banking system that no bank agreed anymore to open bank account to a designated terror organization. No bank agreed to provide financial services to Islamic charities that identify with terror organizations. And no bank agreed to operate in terror zones like South Lebanon, like Gaza. There is no banking system in Gaza. This is why we see them smuggling money into Gaza in cash, in suitcases, through money changers. But that caused Hamas a great deal of harm because they need to bring hundreds of millions of dollars into the Gaza Strip. They run a government. In order for Hamas to continue shooting missiles towards Israel from the backyard of the population in Gaza, in order for Hamas to use the population as human shields, they need to gain the loyalty of the population by paying them and providing them with all services they need. That costs a lot of money. Hamas has a military. They have tens of thousands of soldiers. They are all on payroll on a monthly basis. Hamas supports its prisoner who is sitting in the Israeli jail. It's not only the Palestinian Authority that pays the money. As a matter of fact, there is a competition between Hamas to the Palestinian Authority who pays more. Hamas pays between $500 to $3,000 per month for the prisoner. Depends on the sentence they got, which depends on the number of Israelis he killed. And Hamas continues digging these underground tunnels and bringing arms, ammunition, and missiles into the Gaza Strip. To maintain all this infrastructure, Hamas budget spent today on $500 million. They cannot bring in cash and suitcases. They need a bank. And every time there is a bank that doesn't care, that dares to wire money into the Gaza Strip, we file a lawsuit against it in the Federal District Court of New York. As I mentioned before, we have cases against state-sponsored terrorism. Every time Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah are carrying out attacks against Israelis, we file a lawsuit against Iran, against Syria, and against North Korea in the Federal District Court of Washington. Iran and Syria are pretty obvious players. They support Hezbollah, they give them ammunition, training, safe haven, they pay money to Hamas, so Islamic Jihad. What North Korea has to do with the Middle East? So the first attack that North Korea supported happened in the airport in Israel in 1972. Back then was called Lod Airport. It was done by Japanese Red Army terror organization headed by Kozo Akamoto. This terror cell took a flight of Air France, arrived in Tel Aviv, opened for the bags to arrive on the carousel. When the bags arrived, they opened them up, they pulled out hand grenades and guns and started shooting towards all the people in the crowd. They killed 28 Puerto Ricans, Christians, pilgrims that saved their entire life to come to visit Israel. We represent the victims in a lawsuit against the country that supported the Japanese Red Army. North Korea filed a lawsuit in the court in San Juan and got a judgment against them for $378 million. Then we found out that Hezbollah was the one who helped, that North Korea was the one who helped to build the underground tunnels of Hezbollah, that Hezbollah utilized during the Second Lebanese War to shoot missiles towards Israel. We gathered victims from the war and filed a lawsuit against North Korea, won a judgment for $332 million. And we did the same thing against Iran and against Syria. These countries don't show up in court. They don't send lawyers to litigate the case. We have a default judgment not before we prove liability and damages before the court, and then get judgments for hundreds of millions of dollars. And then the big question comes, how do you collect? In the beginning, we found bank accounts that belonged to the Iranian government frozen in the United States. We wanted to seize the money in the account. The State Department opposed us. The State Department did not want the victims to receive the money. They wanted to have a say what to do with the money. They wanted to keep it for better days with Iran. We hired Stuart Eisenstadt. He helped us to pass a law in the Congress that overcame the objections of the State Department. And we were able to seize the money in the account. It was given to the terror victims. One day we found a house that belonged to the Persian Shah. Years ago, when the son of the Persian Shah wanted to become a pilot, his father sent him to Lubbock, Texas, where they have a big Air Force base, and bought him a house. After the Islamic Revolution, the house became an asset of the Islamic government. We learned about the house. We went to the sheriff in Lubbock, Texas, gave him our judgment, and asked him to force a sale on the house. The sheriff sold the house, gave the money to the terror victims. Today we have a lien on a skyscraper in Manhattan, a huge building called 650 Fifth Avenue. It's owned partially by an Iranian bank that's owned by the Iranian government. Iran fought this case until the Supreme Court. They lost. Now the building is for sale. The process will go to the terror victims. And recently we filed a lien on the deal that Iran signed with Boeing to purchase 80 aircraft for $17 billion. We went to the court in Chicago, where Boeing has its headquarters. We filed a lien on the deal. We said, we have a judgment against Iran. We are entitled to the Iranian money or to the aircraft. Boeing came to court. They said, if we succeed with the lien, Iran will pull out of the deal with them, which will obstruct the nuclear agreement. Because the nuclear agreements, one of the components there was that Iran will be able to purchase American manufacturers' airplanes. We came and said, who are you, Boeing, a private company, to defend Iran, to protect them from paying their judgments? So the court didn't know what to do, and he reached out to the State Department. And the State Department took 8 months, but then came to court, filed a statement of interest saying that they recognize the rights of the victims to enforce their judgment against those who devastated their life. They are not getting involved in this case, and they let us go forward against Boeing. We're able to receive $2 billion in judgments so far. And due to this enforcement proceeding, we're able to collect more than $300 million that went to the terror victims. Jonathan Bauer was 7 years old when he was walking one day holding his father's arm in Jaffa Street in Jerusalem in August 2001. They came back from a medical appointment. They were heading home. Jaffa Street is a very crowded street. But right in front of them, there was a big, wide-shouldered man walking towards them. What they didn't know back then was that the guy was a Palestinian policeman. They also didn't know he was wearing explosive vest. And in his vest, he had bolts and nuts and screws, as many as he could carry. And then the man looked at Jonathan's eyes and blew himself up. Jonathan fell on the floor. He lost his consciousness. He was rushed to Shurat Hospital in Jerusalem, and for 4 days, the doctors had operations on him, trying to take out all the bolts and screws and nuts that went into his arm and his leg. After 4 days, the doctors woke him up. They told the parents that there is 1 screw left in his brain that they were too afraid to take out. Today, Jonathan talks. He doesn't talk like we do. He walks. He doesn't walk like we do. He's disabled for life. That was not the only attack perpetrated by Palestinian policemen. Thousands of terror attacks under Yasser Arafat were done, perpetrated, assisted by employees of the Palestinian Authority, by people who get their paycheck from the Palestinian Authority, who gets commands from the Palestinian Authority. We wanted to have a judgment from a federal court in the United States who's steering this intifada, that it's not a simple grassroots operation, but it's something directed by Yasser Arafat and the Palestinian Authority. So we gathered 10 families of American victims that all the terror attacks that they were killed or injured were done by Palestinian policemen or Palestinian security guards, and filed a lawsuit against the PA and the PLO in the federal court in New York in 2004. The Palestinian Authority hired a lawyer, a boutique law firm from Washington, D.C. that came, filed a motion to dismiss, and said, first of all, we are a state. Since the Palestinian Authority is a state, we have sovereign immunity, we cannot be sued in court. Second, he said, United States has no jurisdiction over us. We are not president of the United States, no connection. Third, he said, what the Palestinian employees did considered to be a legitimate act of war, and therefore it's unjusticiable. No court can deal with this case. It took the court 4 years to come down with a decision. The court threw out their motion to dismiss. The court ruled the Palestinian Authority is not a state. They don't have sovereign immunity. The case can go forward against them in New York. And you can say a lot about what the Palestinian policemen did, but you could not say it was a legitimate act of war. Case went to discovery and deposition for 7 years and finally went to trial. It was a jury trial. It opened in January 2015 in New York. I had to spend the coldest months of my life in New York. The Palestinian Authority had a defense. They said, indeed, they were our employees, but they were rogue employees. They did the attacks after work hours. They weren't authorized to kill Israelis. It wasn't our policy to kill Jews. But when the trial opened, they found it hard to explain to the jury. If they were rogue employees, how do you keep paying their salary until today? These terrorists who were engaged in the terror attacks that were caught by the Israeli forces were put on trial in the Israeli court and now serve their sentence in the Israeli jail, keeps receiving money from you. You promote them in rank every 3 years. You pay compensations to their families. You pay stipends to the families of the suicide bombers. You call town squares and streets on the names of the terrorists. This is not how you treat rogue employees. This is not when your policy is against killing Jews. There was no surprise there that after 7 weeks of trial, when the jury came back from deliberation, they found the PA and the PLO responsible for all 24 acts of terrorism and gave us a judgment for $655 million. The Palestinian Authority was in shock. They fired their boutique law firm from Washington, D.C., hired a new one from New York, and filed an appeal. In the United States, in order to file an appeal, you have to post a bond for the entire amount of the judgment. Palestinians came to court and said, we don't have $650 million to post in the court, and reached out to the State Department for help. And the State Department helped. It was under Obama's administration. The State Department came to court and said, although they recognize the rights of the victims to enforce this judgment against those who devastated their life, the Palestinian Authority is a national asset of the United States in the Middle East. The interest of the United States is the Palestinian Authority will keep existing to the side of the State of Israel. They don't want it to go bankrupt. They asked the court to be considerate. And the court was. Instead of $650 million, the court imposed only $10 million bond. But then they have to argue an appeal. They didn't challenge the jury verdict. They didn't challenge the expert reports that we filed or their testimonies. They didn't challenge the evidence, thousands of documents we submitted in court. They didn't challenge the testimonies of the victims. They challenged one thing: personal jurisdiction. They said in camp, the United States has no jurisdiction over the Palestinian Authority because the Palestinian Authority is not present in the United States. They don't run business in the United States. There is no connection to the United States. No personal jurisdiction. And the court had a dilemma. Because on one hand, this case was filed based on the Anti-Terrorism Act, a law from 1996 that Congress legislated after the Aquila Lauro, when American victim was killed on board and there was nobody to sue. So the Congress legislated this law that says any American victim that American citizens were killed or injured in a terror attack abroad can bring his case in the United States. It's intentionally against overseas terror organizations. It's an extraterritorial jurisdiction law. On the other hand, you have the Constitution, due process. So the court, having these two allegations, but having in the middle the letter from the State Department that says, in other words, no matter what judgment you're going to give against the Palestinian Authority, they have no money to pay it, went and vacated the judgment. We filed a writ to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, knowing that there is a new Pharaoh that didn't know Joseph, asked the State Department, perhaps they have a different opinion. Now it's under Trump administration, and the State Department came and said that they uphold the decision of the Court of Appeal. The Anti-Terrorism Act is not constitutional. The Supreme Court rejected our writs. But we didn't stop there. The victims went to the Congress and told them that they litigated this case for 15 years based on the Anti-Terrorism Act, a law that Congress legislated. It was a very well-intended law, but the court found it unconstitutional. So now Congress has to fix the problem. They have to reinstate personal jurisdiction. And the way for them to do it is by a law saying that if the Palestinian Authority wants to receive money from the United States, they have to consent to personal jurisdiction. They have to agree to litigate cases against them in the United States. Congress passed the law a month ago, and 2 weeks ago, President Trump signed on off the law. We filed a motion to reinstate the judgment, see what happens with this case. But one thing we know, that the Palestinian Authority's leader, we were told like this by the security services in Israel, they could not believe how the little support they gave the Palestinians before the attack, how the little support they gave the terrorists, the money, the ammunition, the safe haven they gave them before the attacks, turned in the end of the day to hundreds of millions of dollars in damages against them. And lastly, social media cases. A father of 40-year-old man was killed in Israel. His name was Ari Fuld. We all know him from the social media. We know him, how he fought for Israel. And we know one thing about his killer. We know his age. Do you know how old was the Palestinian that killed him? 16 years old. And as a matter of fact, most of the terror attacks happened in Israel in the past 3 years were perpetrated by 15 or 16 years old Palestinians. And you wonder, what brings these teenagers to go and kill Israelis? What drives them to go to their mother's kitchen, grab a knife, and go and kill a Jew, knowing that in the end of the day they might get killed or spend the rest of their life in jail? And you realize that this is the incitement to kill that drives them. But the incitement that used to take place in previous intifadas in the town squares, in the streets, today is taking place in the social media. You will find thousands of posts calling to kill Israelis, pages named Stab the Jew, videos illustrating how to stab, how to push the knife, how to twist the knife, what poison to put in the knife before you go and stab, where to ambush the Jew, diagrams of human's body, where to slaughter the Jew. And all these terrorists have a Facebook page that's according to the security services in Israel, where they all got hundreds of posts of hatred and incitement, and they themselves post, I'm going to become a Shahid. It's time to start the third intifada. It's time to liberate Al-Aqsa Mosque. And after they go and stab, you will find tens of thousands of posts endorsing their acts, glorifying it, encouraging others to follow them. All this incitement is taking place in Facebook, because Facebook is the most popular social media network among the Palestinians, to the extent that Prime Minister Netanyahu called this wave of terrorism the Facebook Intifada. But he not only called it this way, he urged his ministers to go and meet with officials of Facebook to beg them to take this incitement down. But Facebook refused. Facebook said they are a neutral bulletin board. They are not involved with their users, and they are not involved with the content. And they are not going to take a side in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. So we decided to sue Facebook. And to do that, we wanted to get as many plaintiffs as possible, so we launched a campaign. Within 3 days, we got 20,000 Israelis joining the lawsuit. We ran the campaign on our Facebook page. And we were scared that Facebook is going to close down our page. And we filed an injunction against Facebook in New York. The injunction was twofold. One, that Facebook will take down all this incitement. But the second, that Facebook will be proactive. That they will monitor this incitement and take it down. And we claim that Facebook has the tools, they have the algorithm to do that. The same way Facebook knows what type of coffee I drink in the morning, they can monitor these deadly words and take them down. Facebook filed a motion to dismiss. They said they were immune according to the Communication Decency Act. This is a law from 1996 that Congress legislated in order to keep the internet open, and it grants blanket immunity to social media networks and servers for content. So we filed our response and said, first of all, when Congress legislated this law, which was a well-intended law, they did not envision this sort of incitement that would cause people to go and kill. Such type of words that cause a clear and imminent danger are not protected by freedom of speech. Second, we claim Facebook is very involved with their users and very involved with the content. They push ads, they push promotions, they make billions of dollars from their commercials. They offer friendship, they offer to join groups. They are really the one who connect between those who incite to kill to those who eventually go and do it. And third, we said, Facebook does take a position, depends to what side. And to prove this, we opened 2 pages on Facebook, 2 identical pages. One page calls to kill Palestinians, the other page calls to kill Israelis. And we posted identical posts with identical images, just with one difference. One against Palestinians, the other against Israelis. And after 2 days, we asked Facebook to take down both pages. Facebook immediately took down the page that called to kill Palestinians. They sent us a fair message saying that they checked the page and it does not fit their community standards. But they left the Israeli page standing. They sent us a message saying that they checked the page and it does not violate their community standards. But we know we have a problem. The Communication Decency Act is an absolute law. There is no exception whatsoever. Anyone can put anything they want on the Facebook page, and Facebook will be immune. So we're looking to see if there is something that Facebook could not be immune from. And we found it. It's aiding and abetting terrorism. In the United States, no American company is allowed to provide any sort of services to a designated terror organization. Bank is not allowed to open bank account to Hamas or Islamic Jihad. Facebook is not allowed to provide communication services to Hamas, a tool that they never had before and cannot do without. Because Hamas is using Facebook to spread their propaganda, to send messages, to recruit militants, to join them over to go and kill, to raise funds on Facebook. This is prohibited according to the Anti-Terrorism Act. And now we don't have personal jurisdiction problem because these are American companies. And the Anti-Terrorism Act imposed civil and criminal liability. Criminal liability is for United States government to indict Facebook. Civil liability is for us to take Facebook to court. So we gathered 5 families of terror victims that lost their loved ones in recent stabbing attacks in Israel and filed a lawsuit against Facebook in New York for $1 billion. One of the families we're representing is the family of Taylor Force. We all know him from Taylor Force Act, 29 years old student, non-Jewish, West Point graduate. He went to business school after his military service, and in the course of his business school, he came on a tour to Israel, In his second day, he was walking on the promenade in Jaffa and got stabbed to death by Palestinian terrorists. One of the victims is Richard Lakin. Richard Lakin was a human rights activist who wanted to believe in coexistence. He took a bus in Jerusalem, and 2 terrorists from the Hamas boarded the bus, shut down the door, and started shooting towards all the passengers. They injured Richard, did not kill him, so they took a knife and finished the job. One of them is Hallel Yafariel. Hallel was a beautiful girl. Blonde hair, blue eyes, an excellent student, a great ballet dancer. She was only 13 years old. And one day she had a performance in her community, Kiryat Arba. She went with her parents, she danced. They had a competition, she won. She was the happiest girl on earth, and in the end of the night, they went back home to sleep. She didn't have school the next day, so she stayed in bed when her parents left to work. And then a terrorist from the nearby village entered the community. He did not do it through the front gate. He made a cut in the fence that alerted the security services. They came riding on their jeep looking for the one that infiltrated the community. They did not find him. He was hiding behind a bush. When they drove away, he got up. He went to the first house he saw. He tried to open the door. The door was locked, so he went through the window. He wound up in Hallel's room. He was holding a knife, and he stabbed her 17 times in her bed until she died. He was 15 years old. He had a Facebook page where before he went to stab, he wrote, "Death is a right, and I deserve this right." We will not let Facebook sit in their ivory towers in Palo Alto when the blood is spilled on the streets of Jerusalem. We will fight them back. We will find them accountable. We will teach them that the social media, they have social responsibility, and they have to take this incitement down because words can really kill. And it's not only Facebook. Imagine ISIS without YouTube. Imagine ISIS without these beheading videos. Who would even know about ISIS? Who would even care? How people in Switzerland and Austria will know to go all the way to Turkey, from Turkey to cross the border to Iraq or to Syria and join ISIS over there without these beheading videos that call people to join ISIS. CNN will not screen these videos. New York Times will not put an ad recruiting militants to join ISIS. It's only on the social media. So in order not to make it an Israeli problem or Jewish problem, we went and represent terror victims from the Paris attack and the Brussels attacks, victims of ISIS, in lawsuits against Twitter and Google in the federal court in New York. This is only a portion of cases we're litigating in Israel, United States, Europe, and Canada. Every day we get more and more calls for more and more terror victims who want to fight back, who are seeking justice, who more than anything else in the world don't want to be victims anymore. And we are dedicated to help. As a matter of fact, in 2008, when the Intifada kind of died down, we thought that we will finish all our cases, close down the office, go and retire in Boca Raton. And then another wave of terrorism unleashed, and we find ourselves representing new terror victims. Every day, the state of Israel is facing more challenges that their answer is in the legal theater. Gaza flotilla, boats that are coming with pro-Palestinians and terrorists on them trying to breach the sea blockade that Israel has over Gaza. And the only way to stop them is by taking legal actions against them. War crime allegations against IDF soldiers, that Israel will not go to the International Criminal Court but open for NGOs like us to come and present the Israeli side. And there is no end in sight. But we are dedicated to help. We established Shurat HaDin, Israel Law Center to take these cases and file them in orderly manner in the courts around the world. It's a non-for-profit organization. All donations are tax deductible. You have envelopes, booklets. Join us in our fight. And it's us, the private sector, to go and do this fight. Because the Israeli government cannot do what we do. The Israeli government's hands are tied. They have political restraints. They have foreign relations they have to take into consideration. They are signed on international treaties. They have to be politically correct. We don't. We are a private organization. We represent private people that have one goal: to bankrupt terrorism, one lawsuit at a time. And we will fight terrorism because we don't have any other choice. We live in Israel. We want to send our kids to school and make sure they're coming back safe. We want to ride our buses. We want to shop in our malls, to sit in our cafes. We want to live safely in our country. And this is our country. Yes, it will be a war. It will be a hard battle, but we all know how the story ends. In the end, we will win because we are fighting for our national survival. The Torah taught us, "Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa." Don't stand idly by your brother's blood. We will not stand idly by our brother's blood. We cannot afford it. The state of Israel cannot afford it. You cannot afford it. Thank you very much.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please, indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.